We are live. Welcome back. This is episode number 42 of Calibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. Thank you guys so much. I never thought I'd be saying episode number 42. The support has been unbelievable. This has been an adventure, and I'm just looking forward to the next 58 to make it to 100. That's just crazy for me to think about. Obviously, I'm doing video now, so that's something new to the video. I hope you guys enjoy that. You have to look at my ugly mug all the time. I'm sorry. I apologize. Just a little housekeeping stuff. If you guys want to go like and subscribe right now, if you like me already, that would be super helpful. It does wonders for me. If you're new, don't like yet. Go like at the end. Watch all the way through and see if you like what I say and if you agree with it. And if you don't, you don't have to like it. You don't have to subscribe, but I think you will. So just hang out and enjoy the show. We have a lot to talk about today. We have two separate topics that have to do with each other, and they are very big events that occurred in Ukraine over the past couple of days since my last podcast. So the first topic that I wanted to talk about, and this is the major event that happened this morning, Ukraine time this morning. The Novakovka Dam in Kherson was damaged in some way. Both sides are blaming each other. But the result is that the dam has completely busted. It is a massive dam. It is a huge Soviet construction, and it holds back a ton of water. I'm going to be putting up pictures throughout this, so you guys will see what I'm talking about here when I talk about the flooding that is going to occur from this event into the southern Kherson region. The city of Kherson is already being evacuated by the Ukrainians, and the Russian fortifications and placements on the opposite side of the river are also being flooded, so they are moving back as well. This is a very big deal. This is one of the biggest dams I think I've ever seen break like this. So this is going to have big impacts on the battlefield. And so specifically, because the second point I want to talk about is the fact that I believe that the Ukrainians have now started their counteroffensive. We'll get to that later. So that's going to, that'll be at the second half of the video. But for right now, I wanted to really focus on this dam issue and, pull it apart and figure out, who's to blame. Was it the Russians? Was it the Ukrainians? Was it the Americans? So let's just get into it. The first thing I'm going to ask always when I see something happen is, how did this happen? Right? That is the first question we all have to ask ourselves. How did this occur? We have satellite photos from June 31st of damage, like erosion kind of the dam and the first bust. So this was 5 days ago. We started to see, or 6 days ago, we started to see this damage from satellite pictures. I don't think anybody noticed it because, people aren't just checking random dams to see if there's damage. There was no explosion or anything. And then this morning, Ukraine time, the dam busted. The water is rushing out. The whole structure is just completely compromised and ripped open. There are three reasons that I could think of as to why this would happen. The first one is probably the most obvious, and that would be mining. What I mean by that is somebody blew it up. Somebody took explosives. They, knew where the weak part of the structure was. They planted the explosives. They compromised it that way. And then structural failure, the whole thing just collapses, which could definitely have happened. The reason why I don't think this has happened is because neither side reported an explosion in this area. There were no missiles in the air at this time from either the Ukrainian or the Russian side. It could have been a bomb, but there would probably be more evidence. We have seen almost nothing. The second thing it could be is it could be the former, when the Russians used to control the bridgehead on the opposite side of Kherson, they used that dam and that bridge that's connected to the dam and the hydroelectric plant to transfer material across, because it was one of the few crossing points across the Dnieper River. And the Ukrainians hit this with artillery and HIMARS, trying to destroy it just like they did with the Antonovsky Bridge in Kherson. And they were successful in doing damage and stopping road traffic for, weeks on end at times and stuff like that. And it was one of the reasons why the Russians pulled out of Kherson. So that damage could still be present. I mean, these attacks were probably 8-9 months ago, but that damage doesn't go away. If it disrupted the foundation in any way, the amount of pressure that's pushing up against the dam all the time is immense. These structures have to be incredibly strong and stable. And, getting struck by HIMARS and artillery can really put a wedge in that. So there's that possibility. The other possibility is kind of funny because it's just coincidental. And that would just be basic maintenance, right? I mean, Ukraine is not known for its upkeep of its infrastructure. It has not built hardly anything since the Soviets were in control. This dam is a Soviet hydroelectric dam. Most of the infrastructure in Ukraine is Soviet infrastructure. So, 30 years of post-Soviet Ukraine corruption and maintenance around the dam could have severely impacted its stability already. Add on top of that previous strikes, or maybe some sort of undermining, and that whole dam could have just been an accident waiting to happen. This might have happened even if the SMO didn't happen. They probably would have caught it, because where this is actually, and I'll post a map, is directly on the line of contact between the Ukrainians and the Russians. There's Russians on one side and Ukrainians on the other. So this might have just been a simple timing, a random occurrence where the bridge was unstable and it lasted for 9 months of being unstable, and then it finally just went, and it just happened to be at the exact same time the Ukrainians went on the counteroffensive. I don't know if I believe in coincidence that much, but I mean, we're going to get into that right now, because I wanted to talk about who has the most to gain from this. Somebody is definitely gaining. I think both sides could potentially gain from this, and this is a way that I help to determine who is culpable for the act, right? So just to start off, I'm just going to go from the Russian perspective, and then I'm going to go from the Ukrainian perspective. These are not necessarily good or bad. They're just reasons why it may or may not have happened. The Ukrainians may have been preparing to, so this is the Russian perspective. The Ukrainians may have been preparing to cross the Dnieper River and do some sort of amphibious assault landing. Rybar in particular has been talking about it. And the timing is what makes me consider this option, because the Ukrainians are launching their offensives everywhere else. And if they put pressure on another point, it could create actual problems for the Russians. If the Russians can delay this a week by blowing the dam, or, compromising it in some way and letting it flood out, they won't have to deal with that problem for another week. Those Ukrainians might be ready to go. They might have gone tonight, or earlier this morning. This could have been perfectly timed by the Russians to completely thwart this timing and delay it a week, which is really bad when you have timing set up to interact with other timings on the battlefield, such as a major push down through Zaporizhia and then a distraction attack in the form of an amphibious landing. Oh my goodness, in Kherson, or possibly at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, that would completely distract the Russians from the fighting in Zaporizhia. And that's when a big fist could come in and do some actual damage. I don't know if that's possible right now, but that is one idea, right? Also, the Russians would be very happy delaying a week because they have deep strike capabilities, they have glide bombs, they have Lancets. The more that equipment sits, the longer it's not being utilized in its forward staging positions, the more the Russians can do damage to the offensive before it even begins. So that's one possibility from the Russian perspective. I heard some talk about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant possibly becoming endangered. So I did some research on it. And from what I found, most of the reactors are cold right now. The reservoir or the pond, I guess, if anybody knows what a nuclear power plant looks like, I'll put up the picture of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant here. But the pond that is used to cool the reactors is fed by the reservoir that was contained by this dam. So in theory, if this nuclear power plant was running at maximum capability, and maximum output, I guess you would say, if all 6 reactors were running, then this could actually potentially be an issue with not having enough water for cooling. However, they're not on, so I don't think that there's any real risk of a meltdown. And I don't think the Ukrainians want that. I think the Ukrainians want to capture the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. I think the Brits want the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant back. The U.S. has even talked about having some, patented technology in that nuclear power plant. So there's a lot going on there. I don't think anybody wants a nuclear disaster in Ukraine. I don't think there might be some crazies out there, but I just don't see that happening. So I don't think that that's a major thing that we need to focus on. The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is very important in this whole discussion, but it's not really being affected by this dam blowing up. And this could really just, throw a wrench directly in what the Ukrainians are doing. It's a big upset. This is a new variable just being thrown out there. So if the Russians did it, it could preempt a Ukrainian offensive. It could delay it, and that could really, really negatively impact the Ukrainians. Now I wanted to move into the Ukrainian perspective on this thing. So for a long time, the Ukrainians have focused on this dam. This dam has played an integral role in the history of Ukraine since 2014. When Russia came in and annexed Crimea, Ukraine turned off the water, which was supplied by this dam to Crimea. It was their main water source. It supplied 85% of their water. And I think 72% of that 85 was for agricultural use. Only 18% of it was for drinking or something. And it can be replaced by desalinization and just trucking in water. But that's a lot of work. So you don't really want this. So that could be a negative. This is something that over a long time could put severe pressure on Crimea and the Russians, which the Ukrainians have not been adverse to using that method in this conflict. So it's a very real possibility. The other thing is the Ukrainians have focused on this dam in a military sense. They have struck this dam with HIMARS and artillery. This dam has been a focal point of their Kherson operation, as well as the Russians. They were using this and they were trying to protect it. I'm just trying to think about how I want to put this next part. Just to finish up the Crimea aspect, there are reservoirs in Crimea now that are 90% to 100% full. So the Russians are not really looking at much of a issue when it comes to the water. But, in the long term, it could really become a problem, and you don't want, and the Russians don't want to deal with that. So I don't know how they plan on fixing it, but the Russians definitely had contingencies and plan for this. And one of the last things that I could think of was that the Ukrainians want to go on the offensive here in a week, right? Because that's about the amount of time it's going to take for the water to, rush all out and then settle. 1 to 2 weeks probably. So next week sometime we'll see if if the water has gone down and if operations can resume in this region. And one thing that has happened is that while this water has washed down, we've actually seen videos of this, is the water is washing away minefields and fortifications. There are major Russian fortifications on that bank of Kherson that are now completely underwater, completely unusable. So the Ukrainians might have blown this bridge. This is one argument in that direction to wash out this entire defensive position. And then, the Ukrainians aren't going to have to fight through it. They're just going to have to walk over it because nobody's going to want to be defending, run down muddy trenches. So that's the whole dam story in terms of me trying to decide, who's culpable for it. But I think the real important aspect of this is that it has happened. We can sit here and argue all day about who did it and why they did it. But I think what's really important is how each side is going to react. And this is what I think everybody needs to pay attention to over the next couple of days is if the Ukrainians immediately launch some sort of operation in the direction of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant because the reservoir is extremely low, that would be a good indicator that the Ukrainians probably had something to do with it. If nothing happens and the Ukrainian offensive continues to completely stall or be delayed for whatever reason, it might not be specifically because of that, but we don't know. And that could have been something that the Russians needed, or it plays into their advantage. So that is another possibility. What I think happened is that I think that 9 months ago, the dam got hit very, very hard. I think that it suffered some sort of structural damage. I think that it wasn't maintained at all, probably over the last 30 years, but definitely over the last year and a half since the SMO started, because it's impossible to do maintenance on things like dams when you're so close to the front and that area is being hit. So at least the last 9 months, it has not been looked after properly. Just judging by the satellite photos that we saw of the dam busting about a week ago, I think that I want to put this into the coincidence category, which I really hate doing because I don't want to believe in coincidences. But if there were direct wins for either side, I would say, yeah, it's a clear-cut case. The Russians did it or the Ukrainians did it. But for both sides, it's not really a win-win and it's not really a lose-lose. It's just kind of a meh. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So the only, like I said, the only thing that would change my mind is if a Ukrainian operation started like tonight or tomorrow, or whenever the reservoir empties out. If a Ukrainian counteroffensive starts very timely, then I would think that this is something that has been prepared. And the reason why I think that might happen is because just to the east a little bit in Zaporizhia, the Ukrainians for the last 3 days have been on the offensive. We have seen probing attacks for a long time, for the past couple months, but they've been, they usually equate to about 10 armored vehicles, light armored vehicles, Humvees, stuff like that. With almost no heavy support, so tanks, almost no artillery support, and no preparation. These were just pokes and prods, trying to figure out Russian response times, trying to figure out where the Russians were weak, where they were strong, so on and so forth. This is stuff that's mandatory when you're talking about military strategy. What's changed over the last 3 days is now we're talking about 100 to 200 men in each of these assaults. We've had assaults in 5 directions in the south, so like 4 in Zaporizhia and 1 over by Ugledar. And then we had attacks in the Avdiivka sector and Bakhmut and Soledar. So this is a large operation that's going on. I still think it's technically in the probing stage, but it's not probes anymore. This is a dedicated attempt to expose a weak spot, and I think that fist is waiting in the back to push in once that weak spot has been exposed. Unfortunately for the AFU, there doesn't seem to be a weak spot in Zaporizhia. Over 3 days, the Ukrainians lost multiple armored vehicles that we have visual confirmation of. I'm going to give you the MOD numbers real quick, just because the Russian MOD numbers, just because I'm specifically interested in comparing and contrasting what both governments say. Unfortunately for us right now, and this is another reason why I think this offensive has officially started, is the Ukrainian government hacked into a bunch of TV stations and were playing a video on their own stream, which I'll add in right here. And it is just a propaganda video of the AF, guys in uniform hushing, like, shh. It's kind of cringy and also very creepy. I don't, if it's supposed to scare, I guess it's doing its job. I don't, it's basically saying don't take pictures, don't take videos, don't talk, don't tell anybody about what we're doing, the movements, and so on. Basically, loose lips sink ships, which is fine, but they hacked into the Crimean television networks to do this. And that's so we're not getting any information from them. They tend to go very silent when they're in operations, which is totally understandable. I mean, you want to maintain OPSEC, so operational security. So according to the Russian MOD, during the offensive operations, this is by their admission, they have lost 71 men killed in action, 210 men wounded in action. They've lost 15 tanks, 9 IFVs, and which, if you don't know what that is, infantry fighting vehicle, and 9 artillery pieces. These are considerable losses, but over 5 different fronts, one front, but 5 different probing attacks through that front, those losses are pretty minimal. And considering the commitment that the Russian MOD is saying, take it with a grain of salt. It's the Russian MOD. Obviously, they're going to bump up their numbers, but we have seen videos, and I will put them in this, of destroyed vehicles, the 5 Max Pros all in one area. We had videos of KA-52 just slamming a column of Ukrainian vehicles, because the Ukrainians don't have the necessary air defense capabilities for forward operations. It's very difficult to keep an offensive covered by air defense, and it just isn't happening for the Ukrainians seemingly right now. The MOD also stated that, and this is in quotes, in just 3 days of hostilities in all directions, the losses of the armed forces of Ukraine amounted to 3,715 casualties, which is wounded and killed in action. So probably 1,000 killed and the rest wounded. So 2,700 wounded. 52 tanks, 207 armored combat vehicles, 134 vehicles, so probably civilian vans and cars, 5 aircraft, 2 helicopters, 43 field artillery guns, and 53 unmanned aerial vehicles. Obviously, grain of salt. But I think that even if this was a outright lie, we still have enough evidence that these attacks occurred, and they occurred in a large enough strength force to assume that the casualties of the Ukrainians are rather high. It would be hard to work your way around that logically. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So, it's so-so. Another reason why I assume that this is the official offensive is because we saw Western armor. For the first time, we saw the French AMX-10, which is a tank. It's a light armored, self-propelled gun, basically a tank destroyer with wheels. So, not really the best frontline vehicle, definitely better at range and highly mobile. The Ukrainians did not use them in the proper manner. Either that or they got into a very unfortunate situation and they just couldn't get their way out. We saw 3 destroyed AMX-10s, so we have confirmation of those. And all of those belong to the AFU's 37th Brigade. And this brigade is one of the almost the lower tier of the new brigades that were slotted to go on this offensive. So they're not given the best equipment. They don't have Bradleys, Leos, and that sort of stuff. They have these AMX-10s. So they were probably a little bit stronger of a force that was supposed to make, create a hole, and then that bigger fist would come in behind it. This offensive just failed. They barely captured one town, one little village. And I'm being very gracious when I say village. I mean, this is a village. Basically farmhouses. It's a small farming community on a road. It's it's no bigger than the street any of us live on. It's very tiny. It's just a few houses, and it's on the front line. So it has been abandoned for a long time, and it's probably completely destroyed. Um, so it's more of a territory capture than a town capture. And it was minor. I mean, for the losses the Ukrainians took, this event was just not worth it. I think even these towns may have already been returned to Russian control. It's very cloudy right now. We don't know everything, but you know, it is what it is, and we just have to do our best trying to analyze all of this and figuring out what's going on. Um, I'm just scrolling through my notes here real fast. So one of the connections that I can make with possibly with the dam is that this Ukrainian counteroffensive it's just not working. This is day 3 with no results. I think they went on the attack again today, so it would be the 4th day. We don't have any word. The reports were that it was still not fully Western equipment, so they're still sending in the trash brigades to just take casualties and try to figure out, collect information on Russian positions and stuff. I don't know if they could have blown the dam as a distraction, because that is a big distraction. Nobody's talking about what's going on in Zaporizhia. They did this with Belgrade when Bakhmut was falling. They started going in and terrorizing in Bakhmut and just creating, in Belgrade, and just creating problems. And that was all to distract. It was to give the press something to talk about as Bakhmut was falling. I mean, this was a significant PR hit that was definitely avoided by the little slippery PR snakes that the Ukrainian government is, and their very gullible, distractible audience. The Belgrade stuff is still occurring, and it's just nothing is coming out of it. They're just sending in Polish mercenaries now have been confirmed to be a part of these Russian legions that are going into Russia. So now you have a NATO member sending in mercenaries, right, into Russia proper and terrorizing. That's all they're doing. They're just shelling civilians. They're not accomplishing any military tasks in the town, other than possibly some people have made the argument that the Russians are rotating troops up, which I just don't buy it. That's not real to me. I think that the Russians are handling the situation, fine. The Ukrainians are making a big deal out of it, trying to say it's some major thing. It's just a border spat. They're not getting more than 2 kilometers over the border before they're getting pushed back. So once again, the Ukrainians could just be utterly distracting everybody with this if they were the ones who did it. They might not have been. Like I said, it was 5 days ago, so who knows? This whole thing is very fresh, and I think it just is going to take some time to figure out what's going on, and we probably won't know. One more thing that I wanted to talk about today was the recent strike pattern that has been occurring, and how this pattern has sort of really finally, I feel, exhausted Ukrainian air defense. The Russians have been running the same air operation for the past couple weeks, since basically, the SMO2 started. They began flying down from northern Russia, entering the Caspian Sea, firing their missiles from the Caspian, and then these missiles can be maneuvered. They're cruise missiles, so they can be maneuvered in any direction the Russians want them to go. So these missiles will come in from the north, the east, or the south. I'll put up a map explaining how that works. But these missiles are then joined by Garand 2 kamikaze drones that take off from whichever direction is required to suppress AD and distract AD. They have also been noted as launching balloons with reflectors on them to confuse air defense, which is a big deal. That's another little, it's just an extra thing that the Ukrainians have to think about and deal with. Another aspect of these strikes that has really solidified their effectiveness has been increased electronic warfare. The Ukrainians seem to be all over the place when it comes to these strikes. They don't know what's coming, where it's coming from, and they are just trying to react the best they can. And these strikes have been successful. Multiple airfields have been targeted, and I think that this is the major goal of the Russians right now. Is they have been hitting almost every airfield in Ukraine now that Ukrainian airfields are an actual, worthwhile target. Ukrainian aviation hasn't done anything this entire conflict. Don't be fooled by Ghost of Kiev nonsense. It has literally done almost nothing except got a lot of pilots killed, because anytime they go up, they're up against Russian air defense, man pads. It's the same thing that the Russians were dealing with for a very long time. The Ukrainians didn't have JDAMs, and when they got JDAMs, they didn't really work. The GPS jamming by the Russians was very strong, and JDAMs just weren't operating the way that they had hoped that they would. We've seen maybe a dozen JDAM strikes total, and that's it. So the Russian glide bomb has been outperforming the JDAM in Ukraine. And it wasn't until they got Storm Shadow cruise missiles from the UK that Russia started really targeting these air bases. They have destroyed multiple air bases, done significant damage to multiple air bases. They hit Poltava and Dnipropetrovsk last night. They have hit Zhytomyr and Kiev oblasts, different airfields in those areas. So there has been this hyper focus, and when these drones and missiles are all converging, there's a lot of confusion. A lot of missiles, air defense missiles, go flying in a lot of different directions. A lot are wasted, and the results are usually still Russian impacts. And this is deep in the country. So this is the only place where air defense is still very relevant. On the front line, we almost see no air defense activity at all. There's been very few, even like Lancet hits of Ukrainian air defense. They're just not around as much as they used to be. We're seeing a lot less manpad usage by the Ukrainians because NATO's out. They just don't have the capabilities of producing thousands and thousands of Stingers like the Ukrainians need. And on the front line, there's almost no air defense. I mean, Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Kharkov, Sumy, Chernigov, Zaporizhia, Kherson, even Dnipro, they just get hammered all day and night by ballistic missiles, by drones, by everything. It's glide bombs all day and night. These places are just getting hit so hard. And this is one of the reasons that I was going to come on here and maybe make an argument for the Russians blowing the dam, is because another week delay on this offensive could have severe catastrophic implications, considering everything is staged within these weapons ranges and are not protected very viably by AD. And, there's just no good way for the Ukrainians to get around this whole situation. I've been trying to figure out if the Ukrainians are just going to bite the bullet and go for it, which is going to cost them heavily. It's going to look really bad. Or if they're going to reset, recalibrate, and, attack in a different way. I'm very interested to see how it goes. I have no idea how it's going to go. I try to listen to information from both sides. And when you listen to information from both sides all the time, you only get the best of both sides. And it starts to become difficult to know who's going to be succeeding, who has the upper hand, because it's just propaganda both ways. But We do our best here. I hope you guys enjoyed this analysis. As these events develop, I'm definitely going to be putting out more podcasts. I will be joined by Brian Berletic soon. I will also be joined by KSB for a podcast. So make sure you guys tune in. I appreciate y'all. And if you like this analysis, please like and subscribe. It's the easiest way you can support me. Follow me on my Twitter and my Telegram, which will be somewhere on the screen. And until next time, guys, I'll see you later. Bye.